Who doesn't love this classic Sega platform? Well, the Japanese, obviously. When it comes to iconic game consoles that's made a cultural impact, a few can hold a candle to this Sega Genesis. Being pretty much just about as legendary a system can be by this point, this 16-bit marvel wasn't just a hit. It was at the epicenter of a gaming revolution. Taking the United States by storm, this console, celebrated as the Megadrive around most of the world, would function as the catalyst that ignited one of the most memorable console wars in history. In fact, it didn't just do well, it triumphed and dominated in so many places, including large chunks of Europe, Australia, and Brazil. In all of these places, it even outsold its formidable rival, the Super Nintendo. Much like the British Empire at its peak, this Sega conquest spanned continents, with the Megadrive establishing dominance in multiple territories. Remarkably, even in North America, where the Nintendo Entertainment System once reigned supreme, its dominance would eventually come to an end at the hands of the Sega Genesis. However, despite these triumphs, a critical setback in one of the most pivotal markets cast a long shadow over the Mega Drive's ambitions of becoming one of the world's best-selling consoles. That setback? Its failure to conquer its home turf in Japan, a region that was, without question, the beating heart of the console gaming industry at the time. This raises the intriguing question: why? So, with all that in mind, let's jump headfirst into the fascinating world of consumer behaviour to uncover why the Sega Megadrive stumbled in its own backyard. How did a console that achieved legendary status abroad fail to leave a lasting impression at home? I am Lady Decade, and this is why the Sega Megadrive got destroyed in Japan. The Sega Megadrive was pure 90s magic, bringing arcade-quality gaming home with style. From Sonic the Hedgehog's blazing speeds to the gritty action of Streets of Rage, its 16-bit power delivered unforgettable worlds, vivid graphics, and soundtracks that still echo today. It wasn't just a console, it was a defining symbol of a generation's love for gaming. The system's library certainly brought with it a certain kind of charm and attitude, with gameplay in the system's key titles differing wildly from the popular AAA titles of today. Fortunately, while times have moved on, great titles inspired by this amazing period in history continue to be pumped out. And what's even better is that I know how you can play them for next to nothing. Get 66% off Streets of Rage 4, 77% off Sonic Mania, or a massive 74% off River City Girls using my affiliate links. In fact, you can get huge money off thousands of games, including 44% off the new PC version of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, all via my links down below. Happy savings and happy shopping. As for today's riveting trip down memory lane, I first need to bring you back to the 29th of October 1988, a date forever etched in gaming history as the day the Sega Megadrive first hit Japan's shores. This was no ordinary system, as the cutting-edge console was powered by technology drawn from not only Sega's brilliant System 16 arcade board, but also anchored by the mighty Motorola 68000 processor. You could easily make a case that in all technicalities it made Nintendo's Famicom look like a baby's toy in comparison. So, what could go wrong, right? Well, as the curtains rose on its launch, the Mega Drive quickly established itself as the most technically advanced gaming console on the market, boasting unmatched power and sophistication. After all, it marked a quantum leap from Sega's previous 8-bit consoles, which had failed to secure a significant market share in Japan or anywhere else really by that point, for that matter. At this crucial moment, Nintendo was clearly the undisputed champion of the Japanese gaming market. The ubiquitous Famicom platform, a system later rebranded as the NES for most parts of the world, was a household favourite that many gamers loved and cherished. In fact, Nintendo's dominance, especially in North America, was a formidable force that posed a significant challenge for Sega, so the company was faced with a tall task when positioning its new 16-bit platform right from the beginning. But the Genesis ultimately ended up doing great in America, so why not at home? One of the most intriguing chapters in the Megadrive story lies in its Japanese launch, which played out quite differently compared to its introduction in other parts of the world. While the Megadrive would eventually grow to boast over 900 titles by the end of its life cycle, its early days in Japan were characterized by a sparse lineup that made it difficult to lure gamers away from the well-established Famicom favorites. In fact, the Megadrive's launch in Japan stumbled right out of the gate. As of day one, the console arrived with just two titles, Space Harrier 2 and Super Thunderblade. While these games showcase the system's impressive 16-bit capabilities, they were far from enough to spark widespread enthusiasm, especially in a market accustomed to the Famicom's seemingly endless catalogue of hits. Things didn't change quickly either. By the time the first Christmas rolled around, the situation had only marginally improved, with Altered Beast and the niche Osamatsu-kun added to the lineup. Sega's failure to secure a broader array of launch titles left early adopters feeling underwhelmed, providing little reason for potential consumers to want to jump on board either. Worse still, the following 6 months were marked by an agonising drought of new releases. For a console that needed to make a strong impression in a fiercely competitive market, the lack of fresh content was a critical blow, to say the least. This sluggish start made it nearly impossible for the Megadrive to gain traction at home, as gamers had little incentive to invest in a new system when its library couldn't match the breadth and variety offered by Nintendo. Despite its sleek design and futuristic 16-bit hardware, it was difficult to drum up excitement for a console with such a limited game library, especially in an era when a strong launch lineup could make or break a system's appeal. By the 1st of January 1990, an astonishing 15 months after its Japanese launch, the Megadrive had a meagre library of just 26 games. This glaring lack of software support had a profound impact on its performance, as reflected in the sales figures. By the end of 1990, Sega had managed to sell approximately 1 million Megadrive units in Japan, which, although sounding like quite a lot, was a dismal number when compared to the Famicom, which had already surpassed a staggering 20 million units sold. The cold hard truth was that the console wasn't even in second place, as even NEC's PC Engine, Sega's lesser-known competitor, managed to outsell the Megadrive during this period, putting Sega down in third place. But what made matters even worse was the extreme lack of third parties who were developing games for the system. Compounding the issue, Nintendo, ever the fierce competitor, had been locking down developers with aggressive exclusivity deals. These contracts effectively barred some of the most talented studios from working on Megadrive titles, leaving Sega with a shallow pool of partners to rely on. The consequences of this early misstep were profound. Without a robust library to attract players, the Megadrive struggled to establish itself. This lack of third-party support didn't just slow down the console's growth, it cast a long shadow over its trajectory, making it nearly impossible for Sega to close the gap with its rivals. In a market where software truly was king, the Megadrive was left to fight an uphill battle, one that would define its fortunes for years to come. It appeared Nintendo had an ironclad grip on Japan. The titans of Japanese game development, Capcom, Konami, Square and Enix, were firmly loyal to Nintendo, leaving the Megadrive in a much weaker position. What made this even worse is that, unfortunately, Sega's internal strategies did little to help their cause. While Nintendo excelled at fostering close relationships with developers and maintaining tight control over its software ecosystem, Sega's approach was plagued by inconsistent messaging and lukewarm support for external studios. This lack of cohesion left third-party developers who were interested in working with Sega hesitant to commit to the Mega Drive, further widening the gap between Sega and its dominant rival. In relation to this chapter of history, former Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske later admitted that Sega failed to apply the bold and aggressive strategies in Japan that would later be proven to be wildly successful in the US and Europe. While markets abroad were treated to bold marketing campaigns like the iconic Genesis does, what Nintendo don't in the US or in the UK, the memorable slogan, "To be this good takes ages. To be this good takes Sega." Sega's approach in Japan was far more subdued. Competitive advertising in the region was considered impolite, forcing Sega to tread carefully with its messaging. While Sega's Western branches were taking bold jabs at Nintendo, Sega Japan came across as far too restrained, more pat a cake than proper fight. Unsurprisingly, this softer approach failed to connect with consumers, leaving Sega struggling to gain traction. Adding to the challenge, Nintendo's aggressive exclusivity deals locked down the major developers into its ecosystem, cutting the Mega Drive off from high-profile titles. It felt as though Sega showed up to a battle of wits, completely unarmed, while Nintendo arrived with an entire arsenal at its disposal. No matter the reason, Sega's subdued approach generated little interest. This timid strategy effectively left the door wide open for Nintendo to dominate unchallenged. Sega's failure to adopt a similarly bold and aggressive playbook in its home market not only stalled its momentum, but also gave the impression that it wasn't even serious about competing. As a result, Sega found itself trapped in a frustrating predicament, unable to secure the support of the industry's biggest developers, partners who could have propelled the Mega Drive to new heights. With Nintendo firmly monopolizing the most influential studios and Sega failing to present a compelling case for its platform, the Mega Drive's quest for relevance in Japan often felt like an uphill battle with one hand tied behind its back. If Sega weren't going to shout from the rooftops that they were better than Nintendo, then who else was going to bother to do so? Not the Japanese, obviously. Due to the platform's successes overseas, the Mega Drive, as you know, would ultimately end up with a huge library and a fair amount of support from third parties. So while Konami and Capcom eventually began developing for the Mega Drive, their arrival felt like locking the barn door after the horse had bolted. By the time these legendary developers turned their attention to Sega's console, Japanese gamers had already sworn their allegiance to the Super Nintendo. Sega's belated efforts to court these heavyweights came across as too little too late, and the impact on the Mega Drive's reputation was difficult to reverse. Worsening the situation with Konami and Capcom, Nintendo's exclusivity agreements ensured that major franchises such as Street Fighter II and Turtles in Time were locked to the Super Famicom for a full year after release. When the embargo finally lifted, Sega seized the opportunity to bring Street Fighter II Champion Edition to the Mega Drive, but Nintendo wasted no time firing back. Almost immediately, they released the Street Fighter II Turbo for the Super Nintendo, which not only boasted faster gameplay, but reinforced Nintendo's position as the home for premier third-party titles. This tit-for-tat exchange highlighted Sega's constant struggle to play catch-up, as even their most significant victories were quickly overshadowed by Nintendo's countermeasures. The delay in securing key developers and franchises hurt Sega's ability to establish the Mega Drive as a must-have console in Japan. Gamers who had grown accustomed to experiencing the latest and greatest games on Nintendo systems saw little reason to jump ship, leaving Sega to fight a losing battle in its own backyard. The Mega Drive's library, while eventually impressive, lacked the early momentum needed to sway a fiercely loyal audience, and by the time Sega began to close the gap, the damage had already been done. What a disaster. But sadly for Sega, there were even more reasons that the Japanese stuck with Nintendo. In Japan, the Famicom and Super Famicom were synonymous with the golden age of JRPGs, a genre that captured the imagination of an entire generation of gamers. Titles like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy became cultural phenomena, selling millions of copies and influencing everything from anime to merchandise. These games weren't just popular, they were defining aspects of Japanese gaming culture, with Dragon Quest III's release in 1988 causing such a stir that it reportedly led to school absences and prompted new laws around weekday game launches. The Super Nintendo only amplified this legacy, becoming the home for classics like Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana and Earthbound, all of which pushed the boundaries of storytelling, music and visuals. JRPGs on these systems offered epic tales, complex characters and vast worlds to explore, creating experiences that felt as immersive as they were emotional. Square and Enix never published titles for the Megadrive, ensuring that cultural juggernauts like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy remained exclusive to Nintendo. At the time, Megadrive owners who were fans of the genre had to settle for Phantasy Star, though judging by the system's sales figures in Japan, it seems not many chose to make such a compromise. But the Mega Drive's lack of success wasn't just about the games, as even their graphics, although better than the Famicom's, wasn't that much better than the rest of the competition. When discussing the legendary 16-bit battle between Sega and Nintendo, one key player is often left out of the story. NEC and their PC Engine, the very system that beat the Mega Drive at home, which I briefly mentioned earlier. While the Mega Drive and Super Famicom dominated the narrative of the console wars, the PC Engine quietly carved out its own legacy as a formidable contender in Japan, shaping the competitive landscape long before Sega's console even entered the fray. The PC Engine, which debuted a full 12 months before the Mega Drive, gave NEC a significant head start in Japan's fiercely competitive gaming market. The timing was everything. By the time the Mega Drive launched, the PC Engine had already built a loyal audience, bolstered by its impressive library and innovative features. In fact, one could argue that the PC Engine was the true catalyst for the 16-bit wars, offering gamers a console with more power and flashier graphics than the aging Famicom, a full year before the Mega Drive hit store shelves. For many Japanese gamers seeking an upgrade, the PC Engine became the obvious choice, leaving Sega's system to play catch-up from the very start. Despite technically featuring an 8-bit CPU, the PC Engine earned its 16-bit bragging rights through its advanced video color encoder and display controller, which allowed it to produce vibrant visuals with larger color palettes and bigger sprites. For gamers wanting a visually striking experience, the PC Engine was a game changer, bridging the gap between the Famicom and the emerging 16-bit era. Though it had its limitations, such as weaker handling of background layers compared to the Mega Drive, the graphical similarities between the two systems were close enough that many consumers saw no clear reason to pick Sega's machine over NEC's already established option. Basically, the PC Engine was already the Famicom alternative. Pricing added another layer of complexity to Sega's struggle. While the Mega Drive was reasonably priced, it was marketed as a premium product compared to the Famicom and PC Engine. This created the perception that it was more of a luxury item than an accessible console for the average Japanese household. Meanwhile, the PC Engine continued to thrive, securing its position as the second most popular console in Japan, behind Nintendo's juggernaut Famicom. While it floundered under the name TurboGrafx-16 in the US, the PC Engine's domestic success presented a massive challenge for Sega, which, in that era, the company were never able to overcome. Adding another layer to the story, Sega enjoyed significant advantages in markets outside of Japan that it simply didn't have at home, and much of that, in part, is due to Sega of America's work with one particular publisher. EA. Despite any reservations audiences might have towards these gaming giants today, it was this company that played a crucial role in catapulting the Mega Drive to success in Europe and the Americas. The lasting appeal of sports games, a phenomenon that still thrives today, has driven many to purchase consoles specifically for their favourite virtual sports experiences. The Genesis was a system that many players specifically purchased to play sports games. With a solid lineup of sports titles, the Mega Drive became an attractive option for Western consumers eager to dive into classics like Madden, FIFA, and PGA Tour Golf. The wealth of sports titles contributed significantly to the console's widespread appeal, offering an enticing option for gamers who were into this sort of thing. However, while this strategy worked well in Western regions, it encountered cultural barriers when applied to the Japanese market. Looking back at this classic Japanese console war, it's clear to see why the PC Engine and Nintendo products had more appeal among Japanese audiences. The reasons go beyond just the advantage of chronological precedence. Despite its technological prowess, the Sega Megadrive faced challenges due to the popularity of specific genres and art styles that didn't quite resonate with the Japanese market. It's no secret that gaming tastes differ wildly across the globe. Japanese kids couldn't get enough of JRPGs, obsessing over games packed with menus, stats, and complicated battle systems because nothing says fun like turning your hobby into an elaborate maths lesson. Meanwhile, American children were busy slamming Mountain Dew and gravitating towards games that featured 3 key ingredients: sports, boogers, and rule breaking. Whether it was scoring touchdowns in Madden, chucking snot in Boogerman, or living out their rebellious fantasies in games like Road Rash, subtlety wasn't exactly a hallmark of the US gaming scene. To put it as crudely as possible, maybe all of this was as simple as Western kids wanted sports, violence, and enough attitude to make their parents roll their eyes, while Asian kids were happily grinding away in games full of numbers, menus, and enough repetitive tasks to make their maths homework look like a warm-up. The Chad Sega Genesis may have stolen the Virgin Nintendo's lunch money in the West, but it seems that in Japan, the Chad Nintendo calmly sat at the top of the cafeteria eating a gourmet bento box while the Virgin Sega tripped over its own shoelaces. Holding a half-eaten rice ball, it dropped on the floor. Literally, what a loser. No matter how you feel about the platform's failings in Japan, one thing is clear. The Mega Drive's library brought a unique charm and attitude to gaming, with its key titles offering gameplay that feels wildly different from today's big-budget AAA releases. Times have moved on, but games inspired by this incredible era are still being created. And the best part is you can play them for next to nothing. Right now you can grab Streets of Rage 4 at 66% off, Sonic Mania for 77% off, or River City Girls at a whopping 74% off using my affiliate links. Plus you can score massive savings on thousands of games, including 44% off of the new PC version of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Check out my links below for all the deals, and if you would like to support me in a more personal way, plus gain access to my backlog of cosplay pictures, then please consider backing me over on Patreon. Decade out.